Welcome to the PODS Writing Workshop. Today we focus on 4 steps to write an effective essay. We're going to spend time today on different sections of writing an effective essay, but ultimately we're going to focus on the first step. The first step is session 1. This is a 4-session series in which you will focus on purpose, outline, detail, and style. The reason why we're breaking this out this way is because each step is vitally important to an effective essay. And we want to make sure that you have the time to review each individual step and find where you may need to review, practice, or go through different processes to be able to write an effective essay. Let's get started with today's session. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about purpose. But before I purpose to tell you the different ways you can write an effective essay, it's important for you to consider the second step. The second step in writing an effective essay will be discussed in outlining. That's the O in PODS. An outline, again, with this image, you'll see it's just a clean way to detail out what you want to put in your essay. We're not going to outline today. We're going to do that in the next session, but I thought it important to make sure you had an opportunity to see where we're headed so you understand the importance of where we're starting. In addition to outlining, we're going to focus on detail as the third step. The detail is vitally important because the detail fills in the outline. We're going to talk about sentence outlining in the next session, but in the third session, we're going to take the outline itself and fill in important details that will allow for us to eventually get to our fourth step, which is style. Style is vitally important in writing an effective essay, as are the other 3: purpose, outline, and detail. Here, style allows for us to look at the APA style, 7th edition, and really think about how we order our pages, how we title our pages, how we think about the font and the spacing, what are page headers, what about our line spacing and margins, and ultimately, very important, is the paragraph alignment, indentation, documentation, sample pages, and most importantly, citing our work. Because it is very important as academics that we cite what we read and we give credit to others for the work that they have shared that are not our original thoughts. So let's talk about writing an effective essay. Well, to write an effective essay, I came up with this here just as a quick way for you to remember why it's important that this is not an individual exercise. Yes, you're writing the paper alone, but you're also researching, looking at others' work, and finding a way to communicate what your message is across the world using words. So writing an effective essay or effective writing using PODS, purpose, outline, detail, and style, requires support from your pod. Effective writing using PODS, purpose, outline, detail, and style requires support from your pod. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's talk about first the PODS writing seminar that we're doing today. If you want to understand purpose, you must first begin to understand that this is the foundation of a good paper. So what is the pod that I'm speaking about second? Well, PODS writing requires support from your pod. Your pod are those individuals in your group who you have a lot of contact with, who know you well enough that they can give you positive, constructive feedback about your writing. It's important that we not write, rush through our work, and then submit it, but also have others check it and ask, are our thoughts coherent? Are our claims that we're making supported with documentation? And most importantly, as I mentioned, not just the outline, not just the detail, but the style. Are we styling our paper in an organized way that others around the world will be able to recognize what we're writing and be able to follow it? Here's the four-phased approach we're going to talk about to write an effective essay. This four-phased approach is vitally important for us to recognize that in the four-phased approach comes different processes that I mentioned before. The purpose. Well, what is the purpose? The purpose of the paper is to understand the purpose for writing. Why do you even want to write this paper? Are you being told you have to write this paper? Are you being told that you must document what you've researched or what you learned throughout the semester? So you start there and brainstorm ideas. You want to choose a topic. And most importantly, as your purpose begins, you also want to understand and decide the outcome of your purpose. Without having an end, your paper can go on forever. So what we want to focus on is how we align our work in the perimeter of what the teacher, the professional organization, our job, or just how we want to write. What is the framework by which we're writing? That is our purpose. That is our outcome. To outline, we want to create a structure that organizes our ideas in order. Ask someone in your pod to provide feedback about your flow and support at this process, and we'll discuss that next week. It's also important to take time to talk about the detail. The detail fills in the gaps of the outline. It fills in the gaps of your organized ideas. The who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. It's also vitally important, as we said before, that your style also communicates. It communicates a message that I understand that no matter where I am, if I use this style, that others will be able to quickly recognize and follow my thoughts and ideas because it is all organized in the same way. Here's a great example. Mathematics, no matter what language we speak, is the same across the world. 1 + 1 is always 2. 2 times 4 is always 8. 16 divided by 4 is always 4. So style allows for us to communicate using formatting, citations, references, grammar, and more that everybody can communicate and understand at the same level. So we've talked a little bit about our pods. We actually spent some time talking about the importance of purpose, the importance of outline, what is detail, and why vitally important we must use a style. And this process uses APA 7, the 7th edition of APA. So now that we understand the pods, and we've talked a little bit about who our pod is, the people that we're close to, that we feel that we can reach out to. Sometimes it's a teacher, sometimes it's a friend, sometimes it's a family member. But we have someone that we can ask to look at our paper and ask, are my thoughts coherent? Is what I'm writing easily understood? In order to do that, you have to contact someone. That's what we call communication. You know what communication is, how we speak across, whether it's with words, whether it's our physical motions, our body language, our actions, we're communicating. But in writing, we call it effective communication because oftentimes the person that is reading what we're writing doesn't have the ability to see how we're writing it, to see how we're saying it. So we must be effective in writing our essay. So what does that mean to be effective? I'm glad you asked. Well, the word effective actually means that we are successful or achieving the results that we want. We are successful or achieving the results that we want. So the first question is, how do you define success? How do you define achieving? And honestly, what results do you want? This is very important as part of the purpose, because if you don't know the outcome or the results that you seek, then you can't imagine how your paper will come together in someone else's mind, because they won't be able to follow where you're trying to end or what statement you're trying to finalize or finish on. So how do we achieve results? Well, there are many processes that we can use to achieve results, but for effective communication, there are a few C's and a T that we must consider. A few C's: complete, concise, correct, concrete, and the T, tone. But what is a paper that's complete? A complete paper contains all the parts or pieces that are possible. Now, if you have a 5-page paper, within that 5 pages, you can only put in it the parts or pieces that are possible in 5 pages. If you have a 10 or 20-page paper, I have a master's in public administration with a concentration in healthcare policy. I've had to write many 20-page papers. I also have a doctorate in public health. In my doctorate, my dissertation was 100 and almost 170, 180 pages. A complete paper allows for you to put in all of the pieces possible within the constraints of that piece of work. Concise. How do you say concise and complete at the same time? Well, concise means that it's short and clear, expressing what needs to be said without unnecessary words. For some, that's very difficult, but it is vitally important that we use all tools available to us to not add unnecessary words to stretch what we're trying to say just to fill up the page. That's where we go back to being complete. Are we adding in all the parts or pieces possible so we don't have to use unnecessary words? Then we're looking for opportunities to cut out words because we have more documentation, more support we want to put in our work. So being concise allows for us to say things that are not unnecessary just to get our point across. We could say things such as to be. Why not get rid of the to and just say be? And being correct, it may be that we need to say to be. But also, as we talk about completeness and conciseness, correct also has to deal with the agreement that we make with the facts, true facts, or with what is generally accepted. If we make a statement, it must be true. Now, some statements and claims that we make are based on research, and research often is based on hypotheses. That hypothesis is an educated guess. As people come up with different models, different formulas, and different thought processes, your agreement with the true facts could be simply restating something someone else made a claim about. That would mean that it's correct. It doesn't mean that what they're saying is correct. It just means that you have documented where you're getting your information from. You're not just making up things to fill up the page. Concrete. The information has to be clear and certain. It's kind of like concise, but this is more about the clarity of the information rather than the length of the information. So clear and certain, or real and existing in a form that can be seen or felt. If something's concrete, then we can recognize or see it that it could potentially exist. When we envision a chair that we sit in, it's a concrete thought and idea because we can begin to envision 4 legs, a backing, a seat that we sit on. But if it's clear and certain, we can say it's concrete. Just like we can say hey, this person has an idea that they envision. This is what they said about it. These are the true facts. And this is what's generally accepted about what a chair is. Now, if you were to say incorrectly that a chair is one leg, you would have to back that up with information. To be concise about that, you want to say it within the constraints of the numbers of letters or words that are allowed for your paper. And complete, meaning that you would provide all the documentation to support that claim that a chair can have one leg. But then finally, the tone is about consideration and also courtesy. We want to be very careful not to offend, hurt, or harm people with our writing. It is very possible that you have good intent, but if the tone of your paper is not written in a way that represents academic integrity, then you lose the opportunity to be heard because people will stop thinking about what you're saying and only think about the effect that you left on what you said. Here's a great example. Someone playing baseball has the opportunity to swing the baseball bat at a ball. We get excited when we see the person hit the baseball and run the bases. Everyone says that this person has a good swing. They swung the baseball bat and hit the ball. The problem becomes that when the bat hits something that it was not supposed to hit, maybe it flies out of the person's hand, maybe it hits the catcher by mistake, maybe it hits the umpire. We don't talk about how good the person's swing is. We only talk about the effect that the swing had on the object it hit. So when your tone is off, it doesn't allow for us to consider what you were trying to achieve. It only lets us see the effect it had on the writing and the work that you were doing. So always be considerate of your tone, how concrete your information is, how correct your information is, how concise your information is, and how complete your information is. Here we go with the point and the claim. Let's dig a little bit into the purpose. So the purpose is all about the point and the claim. Well, to know your purpose, you also must know, what are you trying to achieve here? What's the point of writing this paper? Are you trying to inform someone? Are you trying to persuade someone? Are you trying to explain something? Are you trying to entertain? Each of those have different purposes and different structures by which you will write your paper. To inform someone, you're literally just giving them information, but you're giving it again in a complete, concise, and clear manner that's also concrete so that they can walk away with that information. To persuade someone, you would take the same information that you informed them with, but then you would add some form of editorializing, where you editorialize, you actually give information that sways a viewer or reader or someone that's listening to one side or another. Persuasion. To explain something, you take information, but you actually give detail about it. It's more technical in its writing. And to entertain someone, it may be a form of persuasion. It may be a form of explanation. It may be a form of information. But the whole point is that someone needs to be entertained, which touches their emotions, not just their analytical thinking, but touches on their emotions, to cry, to laugh. All of those are forms of entertainment, not just comedy. So when we think about the different types of what? Types of paper. Types of paper. Well, what are types of paper? Well, you have the analytical type. You have the expository, which is also called the explanatory paper. And you have the argumentative paper. So the types of analytical paper breaks down an issue or an idea into its component parts. Analytical, it breaks it down, analyzing something into its component parts, evaluates the issue or idea, and presents this breakdown and evaluation to the audience. Your audience is very important because your audience determines how you write your paper. The expository paper explains something to the audience. That's why it's also, the definition of expository is explanatory. To explain something allows for you to just get a message across. It's not analytical. It's not always analytical, but most of the time it's usually just explaining something for people to understand. On the other side, the argumentative paper, it makes a claim about a topic and justifies this claim with specific evidence. Most of the time, we are writing these argumentative papers in academia. We're making a claim about a topic and justifying it with the claim by providing specific evidence. The claim could be an opinion. It could be a policy proposal. It could be an evaluation, a cause and effect statement, or an interpretation. How you saw something and read something, you've decided how that information needs to be understood. The goal of the argumentative paper is to convince the audience that the claim is true based on the evidence provided. The goal, remember we talked about purpose. The whole point of this is to get to a goal. Each of these papers have a goal. An analytical paper is about explaining something, evaluating something, and breaking it down so that the issue is fully understood. An explanatory paper or an expository paper is about explaining it simply, just explaining it to the audience. But an argumentative paper goes a little deeper. The goal of the argumentative paper is to make an argument, a claim. That argumentative paper is to convince the audience that the claim is true based on the evidence provided. If you were writing an education paper, if you were speaking about what's going on in academia around the world as it relates to the public health emergency and how education may be shifting or changing, you would want to provide evidence based on studies and research that your argument for one side or the other is true. And your job is to convince and to inform others that what you're sharing can be supported. So what's the point of all of this? What's the point of really writing an effective essay? Well, the point actually only comes out in three ways. First, your main idea. You have to have a main idea. Without a main idea, there's no foundation for the paper. There's no goal. And also, there's nothing to be understood. You're just writing. The second part is the topic sentence. How you introduce the paper, the topic, the information, it really sets the tone for you hooking someone in. To hook them in means that you actually grab their attention, that what you're about to read, audience member, what you're about to see, what you're about to hear is going to hit you in different ways. One, I may be entertaining you. I need to get your attention immediately. We've all seen bad comedians where they actually don't get our attention from the first joke. Or a bad story where the story takes too long to build up and we're waiting to see what the point is. Or an argument made between two people and one only presents their facts without considering the other side. And in that, you're lost because you don't understand what they're actually trying to make their point against and what they're making their point for. So a topic sentence really brings you in. But most important to the paper is your thesis. Your thesis is tying it all together. Your main idea, your topic sentence, and really, what do you want people to find in that paper that they will then be able to go back and throughout the paper consistently see your thesis or your main claim? Let's break that down a little bit. So the main idea. What's that main idea? Well, to find the main idea, because this is all about us looking for and understanding purpose, you have to look at, read, and discuss other works. So to find the main idea, you want to identify the topic. Again, going back to your pod, someone asks you to look at their paper. What's the topic? You want to summarize the passage in your own words. You want to check the first and last sentences of each paragraph. Really, the first paragraph should set the tone. And then you want to find the repetition of ideas. That's where I talked about the thesis. Once the thesis is stated and the claim is made, You want to look for repetition throughout the paper that supports that main idea so that you're not lost in reading about, let's say the person writes about food and they begin to talk about concrete. If they're talking about concrete, but you are writing about food, they may you will lose the reader. So let's stay on topic, keeping to the main idea throughout the passage and looking for repetition in our writing and opportunities to keep pointing back to our main point. So here's a topic sentence. What is a topic sentence? A topic sentence summarizes all the information within a paragraph. Usually at the beginning of the paragraph, you find the topic sentence. It introduces the person into, this is what I'm going to say in these next few lines that supports my original thought. This is what I'm going to say that supports my main idea, my original thought, and my thesis. It also explains to the audience what the paragraph will be about. This is what you're about to read. Used as a basis for the conclusion sentence. Well, the conclusion should really encapsulate all that you've previously stated by restating your introduction or your introductory sentence, your topic sentence, in a different way. Today, I went out to the store. While walking to the store, I discovered that the store wasn't open. So I had to walk 10 more blocks to get to another store. That store had everything that I needed. When I was walking home from the store, I realized that I never looked at the time that the first store I went to when they opened. Today, I had a great day walking around the community, trying to go from one store to the next. I need to walk a little more to see my community. I'm glad I did all of this just because I walked to the store. So you want to tell the story about walking to the store, sticking to walking to the store and really bringing it home that you walked to the store. The store was closed. You begin to walk around the community. You found a whole nother store 10 blocks away. Then on the way back, you realize, hey, I probably should have checked the store hours. And then you close it out with, man, walking to the store opened my eyes to see that me walking around was actually a good thing. So still sticking to the idea that walking to the store can be supported with detail and encapsulated with the final sentence, or what we would call a conclusion. So how does this all lead to the thesis? Well, the thesis is vitally important in the paper. It's the most important part of the paper after the main idea because it actually brings your main idea to life. Your thesis statement should be specific. It should cover only what you will discuss in your paper and should be supported with specific evidence. Your thesis statement should be specific. It should cover only what you will discuss in your paper and should be supported with specific evidence. The thesis statement usually appears at the end of the first paragraph of a paper. Your topic may change as you write. So you may need to revise your thesis statement to reflect exactly what you have discussed in the paper. Now, does that mean you change your thesis statement all the way? No. It means that you may have to recraft or reconsider as you do your outline. Again, session 2, come back for that session also. But as you recraft your outline, you'll realize that, hey, maybe my thesis is too narrow, that I focused in so specific on one topic that there are other topics that I need to weave into my thesis so that I can get my point across. Now, I'm not going to leave you hanging today because we're going to talk about the analytical thesis first. The analytical thesis, here's an example. The analytical thesis, before I give this example, let me explain again what the analytical is. The analytical breaks down the information into manageable chunks that can be understood by the audience. An analysis of the college admission process reveals one challenge facing counselors: accepting students with high test scores or students with strong extracurricular backgrounds. Great thesis. It's analytical, And it allows for the paper to follow the explanation of the analysis of the college admission process. You see it here. An analysis of the college admission process reveals one challenge facing counselors. So you can see that there, that this is actually going to be discussed. And you can see that the paper follows explaining the college facing admissions counselors, explaining the challenge facing admissions counselors. So both parts of what you wanted to achieve, an explanation or analysis of the college admission process and explaining the challenge facing admissions counselors, both are found in this thesis example. Well, what about the explanatory example or the expository paper? Well, the expository or explanatory thesis comes with an example of the life of the typical college student is characterized by time spent studying, attending class, and socializing with peers. So what do you think this paper is going to be about? The life of the typical college student. Well, the paper should follow not only that, but also an explanation of how their time is characterized. Well, it says, explain how students spend their time studying, attending class, and socializing with peers. So there should be supporting evidence around time spent studying. You would use examples about a typical college student spending time studying. How much time do they spend? What are they studying? Attending class. What classes do they take? How many classes do they take? What about the time they spend in those classes? And then maybe relating those classes they spend back, they attend back to the time spent studying for those classes. And then finally, socializing with peers. What's the social aspect of a typical college student? Again, typical. You might want to weave in there the atypical student, the student who is shooting for all stars, all high grades. And in doing so, their socializing may be minimized. You may want to talk about the student who socializes too much. And because of that, his time spent studying struggles. But the life of the typical college student can be compared and contrast in an explanatory way to explain by using time spent studying, attending class, and socializing with peers. I hope you're starting to see the value of having a purpose. Now, the argumentative thesis example. To provide an argument is really to state a claim. High school graduates should be required to take a year off to pursue community service projects before entering college in order to increase their maturity and global awareness. High school graduates should be required to take a year off to pursue community service projects before entering college in order to increase their maturity and global awareness. The paper that follows should present an argument and give evidence to support the claim that students should pursue community projects before entering college. Now, a good paper not only provides the argument of why they should take a year off, but the challenges of them taking the year off. Who actually agrees with this and who disagrees with this claim? Where's the evidence for you to refute what they say? Well, I keep saying the word claim. And that's very important because claims are your statements that you're making. So what about these claims? Well, you'll see claim types written in different ways. Today, I'm going to use the breakdown of them as deciding, acting, and proving. Deciding, acting, and proving. So you have a decision claim, you have an action claim, and you have a proof claim. Well, what's the decision claim? Well, to decide means that there's a choice. You have to make a decision one way or the other. There's an old way and a new way. The decision claim attempts, or the deciding claim, attempts to persuade readers to approve or disapprove of something. Now, you've made a decision. You're trying to get them to decide. So you have to persuade readers to approve or disapprove of something. In doing so, you're going to use words like better, worse, more, than, right, wrong, and beautiful. And when you do that, it opens the door for the reader to quickly understand that they need to make a decision, that they can approve or disapprove of what you're stating and what claim you're making, because you are comparing things better, worse, more, than, right, wrong, and beautiful. And in doing that, you also use adjectives to help to state your claim. What about the ACT claim? Well, the ACT claim is based on action, ACT. It attempts to persuade readers to take action. What action do you want them to take? Remember, when you're watching television or if you're at the store, you're walking outside, there's always marketing pieces. There's always something trying to get you to consider purchasing something, buying something, making a decision, logging online, going to this store, going to this place, buying this thing, buying that shirt, buying these clothes. Well, how do they do that? They use words like should, ought to, must. Attempts to persuade readers to take action. Well, you should do this. You ought to do that. You must do this. You must. That is stating that there's an action needs to be taken on your part. So what about proving something? Well, to prove something, you have to present facts to persuade readers that something existed, currently exists, or will exist. How do you prove something that existed? Well, it's a historical point. It means that it was in the past. Well, what about something that currently exists? Well, you're going to speak about what it is today, what it is during our time, what it is during the time of the millennial, what it is based on a comparison of the time before and the time now. You're persuading readers that something existed, past tense, something currently exists, present tense, or stating a claim based on your proof that something will exist. Can you prove it is the question. And if you can prove it, you're going to use words like leads to, causes, improves, destroys. Leads to, causes, improves, and destroys. So now we've talked about the whole claim. We need to evaluate the evidence that you're using in your claim. We need to evaluate the evidence that you're using in your claim. Most people get nervous when you talk about evaluating their evidence. Well, we're all consummate writers here. We're all intellectual thinkers. Well, in order for us to actually write well, we need to do some evaluation. So here's a method that you could use. It's called the STAR method. Well, if you use the STAR method, you're going to make an evaluation. You're going to talk to at least one member of your pod or group to discuss their analysis of your paper. What claims did they find that you made? Were those claims supported? And if the analysis that they make is different than the analysis you made in your original writing, then you need to take time to understand why. What is the message you're trying to get across versus what is the message that they received? What is the message that you wanted them to understand versus what is the message that they actually understood? Well, in order to use the STAR method, let's start with the S. The S is about sufficiency. Is there enough cited evidence to support the conclusion? Remember earlier, we talked about being complete. Are you providing within the constraints of your paper enough cited evidence to support your conclusion that you want them to get? Here's an example. Generally, only strongly and not weakly supported conclusions should be accepted. If you don't provide enough evidence, how do you want someone to really accept that you've made your point? The more controversial a claim is, the more evidence authors should provide before expecting an audience to accept it. If the evidence is not sufficient, the author may need to modify or qualify the claim by stating that something is true sometimes rather than always. Those modifiers are a good way for you to make a claim that can still be supported sometimes, but not always. It may be that in some situations, the claim that you made is true, but it doesn't have to be that the claim that you made is always true. Just make sure that you strongly support your conclusion with documentation and evidence. So what's the T? We just talked about, is it sufficiently supported? Well, typicality. Typicality, or to be typical, is the cited evidence typical or representative? Typical or representative? What does that mean? If an author makes a claim about a whole group, but the evidence is based on a small or biased sample of that group, the evidence is not typical. Similar problems stem from relying just on personal experiences, or what we would call anecdotal evidence, and from cherry picking data by citing only the parts that support a conclusion while ignoring parts that might challenge it. We all struggle with this. It is our intent to get our message across, but we often forget that in academia, it's not our message we're getting across. It's a message that the reader must interpret and understand. Yes, we have a point we want to get across, but if we're not focused on how the reader understands by supporting it with sufficient evidence and making sure that our claim is cited with typical data, typical meaning that we're not jumping to conclusions without ignoring the challenges, then we miss the opportunity to build the bridge between where we're coming from and where we're trying to go. Accuracy. Is the cited evidence up to date and accurate? Authors using polls, studies, and statistics must ask whether the data were produced in a biased way, and also ask whether the sample was large and representative of its target population, so that results were outside the margin of error. You know the margin of error. The margin of error, if a sample is too small or not well chosen, results may be meaningless because they may represent random variation. Margin of error. Too small a sample or not well chosen sample. You're trying to study how certain training programs may help cats. Certain training programs may help other animals. Well, if you read a study that says, well, jumping every day for cats is good exercise. Feeding these cats this food will help them jump every day. Well, can you take that research and then go and say, jumping every day is good for horses? If you feed horses this food, they will jump well every day. Is that cited evidence accurate? No, because the study had to do with cats. But you're trying to take that claim and actually inaccurately relate it to horses, equine species. Is the cited evidence up to date? Are you looking at a study from 1830? Are you looking at a study from 1920, 1950, 1960, making a claim about 2021, 2019? Are you comparing and contrasting something that happened 100 years ago to something that happened today? In both situations, if you're going to compare and contrast, you need data representing both sides of your argument. That's why it has to be up to date and accurate. So what's the R in the STAR? We have sufficiency. We have that the data must be typical. We have that the data must be accurate. What about relevant? That's vitally important here. The cited evidence directly relevant to the claim. Is the cited evidence directly relevant to the claim? it is being used to support. Is it relevant? Going back to the cat and the horse, are they related? An author may supply lots of evidence, but the evidence may support something different from what the person is actually claiming. If the evidence is not relevant to the claim, the author may need to modify or qualify the claim, or even to acknowledge that the claim is indefensible. If the evidence is not relevant to the claim, the author may need to modify or qualify the claim, or even to acknowledge that the claim is indefensible. We have to be very careful in academia not to allow for the time that we spend to create bias. And the bias that I speak about is that I put time into this work. And since I put time into this work, I don't want to have to start over. So I'm just going to try to finish this, and hopefully no one will notice that I really don't have enough support. I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm just making a lot of wild, irrelevant claims just to fill up the page. That's where we have to go back to be complete, concise, concrete, clear, and making sure that our tone is one in which we stay with the work and find the conclusion. Sometimes the conclusion is, based on all the evidence I have, this may not be true. So now that we've talked about the STAR method, let's wrap all this up by putting it all together. I'm going to do a few exercises just right now so I can show you how to write in your pod using your pod, write with pods using your pod. So again, purpose, outline, detail, and style. Let's put it all together. Here's an article that came out of BBC, bbc.com, and that is a newspaper online, and it's in the UK, the United Kingdom. The UK village that lost its cheese. Just by the title itself, you wonder what cheese they're talking about. Well, it's spelled Cheese. It's the cheese that we would eat, I would hope. So let's see. Cheddar has conquered the world, but it wasn't produced in its namesake English town for years. Cheddar has conquered the world, but it wasn't produced in its namesake English town for years. So there's a town by the name of Cheddar. Okay. Now an award-winning dairy is putting Cheddar, England back on the map. Oh, okay. So they set it up just right to let us know that there is a town by the name of Cheddar, England. So what could this paper be about? What could this paper be about? As we mentioned before, the introduction is vitally important. Not only the topic sentence, but the main idea and the theses. Because this is a newspaper article, there's still a thesis. It's really just, it's different from an academic thesis, but we're using this to make the point that in all of our reading and writing, we have to be considerate of evaluating evidence. So the topic sentence, Cheddar has conquered the world, but it wasn't produced in its namesake English town for years. There are two claims. The first claim is that Cheddar has conquered the world. So we need to look for evidence that Cheddar has conquered the world. Second claim, that it wasn't produced in its namesake English town for years. There are two statements in that itself. The first one is that there is a town by the name of Cheddar. The second one is that it wasn't produced for years in that town. Here's the statement that they're making to tie all this together that we need to look for throughout this article. Now, an award-winning dairy is putting Cheddar, England back on the map. I'm going to stop talking for a moment so you can take a moment to peruse this and kind of take a few minutes. I'm going to give you about 30 to 45 seconds, kind of quickly read through this and see what information here supports the topic sentence, their two claims, really three, and their thesis. All right, I'm back. That's about 30 seconds. Here we notice that there are more than 700 cheeses produced in the UK, it says. But in parts of the English speaking world, a certain type is so ubiquitous that it's simply referred to as cheese. Cheddar is the most popular cheese in the UK, accounting for nearly half of all British cheese sales. So here's a claim and evidence. Nearly half of all British cheese sales. So they must have some sales data to prove their claim. And according to recent polls, it's the favorite cheese among Americans and Aussies, those from Australia, and one of the most eaten types in Canada, too. But while cheese has become a dairy staple from Wisconsin to Wales, here it is again. They're talking about how cheddar has conquered the world. The fact that one of the world's most consumed cheeses, another claim supported by evidence, has no protected designation of origin, where it first started being made, means that it also became one of the most mass produced. So what they're saying here is that although Cheddar England may have come up with the concept and first produced cheddar cheese, that cheddar cheese was not only allowed to be made and produced in Cheddar England. And because of that, the article reads further that when you visit this small town, 5,400 people in the village of Cheddar, then you will notice that the cheese that they make is different from the cheese that you may buy elsewhere. And those claims are supported in this article based on the thesis and the topic sentence. And this is just a fun example for you to take a look at other articles that potentially you'll find online to help you support the STAR method and also answering some of these questions. So what are the questions that you should consider? And this is helpful for you just as a practice to pick your own articles and to think about what is the issue presented in an article. It could also be a paper that your friend gave you or someone in your pod. What is the author's claim? What are you saying to me? What argument are you making? What point do you want me to get? What type of claim does the author make? Are you making a claim that I need to decide something, that I need to act on something? Are you trying to tell me that I need to be upset about something or support something? What support does the author provide for that claim? What type of support does the author include? Using the STAR method, discuss the evidence. Was it sufficient? Was it typical? Was it accurate? Was it relevant? Does the author provide opposing viewpoints? Are there different viewpoints that, hey, our cheddar cheese is better than their cheddar cheese? If so, number 8, of the opposing viewpoints provided, does the author refute any? Are there any refuting points to say that, hey, there's actually something here that I disagree with, and here's the evidence that I disagree with it? So here again, I wanted to make a point that as you read through and as you begin to think about that cheddar is the most popular cheese in the UK, I have an arrow here with red underlined showing where these 2 points come together, accounting for nearly half of all British cheese sales. And according to recent polls, it's the favorite cheese among Americans and Aussies, and one of the most eaten types in Canada. So that arrow points down to where other evidence supports that claim. Nearly half of all British cheese sales. Jump down, it says the world's most consumed cheeses has no protected designation of origin. So what they're saying here is they're going to support the claim that they're making, not only with evidence, but then they add more detail. And we'll talk about that in series 3. But as we wrap up this 1-hour presentation, I wanted to bring in one more just for fun. And I believe that the pronunciation or the enunciation is Sichuan peppercorn. And a Chinese spice so hot it's cool. And this article was written by Megan. And Megan actually makes the point that the food is so spicy that it causes your body to cool down by sweating. That's the end result here. But it's also a key ingredient in mala cooking, Chinese mala cooking. And its effects are said to be both physiological and mental. So, kind of in the vein of one sentence, she gives you an introduction and she gives you a thesis. It's one of the key ingredients in Chinese mala cooking, and its effects are said to be both physiological and mental. Without telling you the name of the spice, she's already got you on the edge of your seat, waiting to find out what is the name of this spice. She goes further to say, I didn't see it coming. That mild feeling of electric currents buzzing on my tongue as if I'd licked a battery. Man, I have to find out what this is. So you keep reading and reading and reading to discover the spice that she's speaking about. But she sets it up in a way that she goes back to making her points. And her points here is not about how good the food is, but the point that I wanted to make is that she makes a claim that it's both physiological and mental, and then she supports that claim. She describes it in a physiological way, and in a mental way, she describes it also. So you would ask yourself, as you read this, what is the issue presented in the article? What are the author's claims? What type of claim does the author make? What support does the author provide for their claim? In her case, it may be anecdotal because she's the one eating the food. She may be talking about her personal experience. As you go further and read down, she even discusses how unsettling at first that tingly feeling of electricity offered a pleasant reprieve from the heat. So now she's going back to her title and making the claim that although it's hot, it's cooling at the same time. So she was sweating. She's talking about how the food tastes. She gives some history about where the burning sensation comes from, and also how when you eat the chilies, how the name came to be. Chinese as la, meaning that burning sensation, and then ma, so that numbing feeling. So all of that has to go back to her support, in which she states what? It's one of the key ingredients in Chinese mala cooking. So she tells you about the food that she's eaten. Then she goes back and says its effects are said to be both physiological and mental. You want to take time? I'll leave this up for about 10 seconds. But if you want to find the article, again, this is on BBC, and you can find the article. But take the time to actually practice this. Take the time to actually go through your trial and error of trying to figure out what claims people make. Are they supporting their claims? Using the STAR method, is the evidence sufficient? With sufficient evidence, do you have enough typical evidence? And then with the typical evidence, is it accurate? And then finally, how relevant is it? So I'm excited. I'm excited because today we went through purpose. And purpose is the beginning of writing. So I encourage you each as we begin to go down this pathway of these 4 sessions of purpose, outline, detail, and style, that you'll keep coming back to this presentation and the others to learn about opportunities for honing in on your purpose, outlining your thoughts, main idea, thesis, and then adding in the detail as we finalize and close out in our 4th week on style. This has been session 1 of purpose. In our session 2, we'll be coming back to talk about PODS writing, purpose, outline, detail, and style writing. Next session, we look forward to you enjoying and understanding how to outline, how to get your thoughts across in different ways, whether that be a detailed outline, a sentence outline, or just your thoughts on a piece of paper so you can begin to put a perimeter around what your purpose was all about. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to you joining us for session 2.